the Associated Press is reporting on within the Trump administration. We'll get that in just a minute with Speaker Gingrich. But first, the reaction to Donald Trump's election continues to escalate, particularly in the academic world. Dozens of colleges and universities are now making plans to become sanctuary campuses on which students who are in this country illegally will be protected by administrators from federal immigration authorities. One of the first schools to take this step is Wesleyan University in Middletown, Connecticut. Wesleyan's president, Michael Roth, joins us now. Dr. Roth, thanks for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
I read various statements about this issued by the school and from you, and it seems like you're taking a stand on principle. You're opposed to this on every level. So my question is, if the Trump administration makes deportation its policy, will you give up the hundreds of millions that Wesleyan takes each year in taxpayer money?
It's a great question, and I wish it were hundreds of millions of dollars, Tucker, but it's not. But there would be.
According to your school newspaper, it's 200 million. It's 200 million.
Yes. Well, you should source your. You remember what it's like to work on a school newspaper. So
how much do you take in federal subsidies?
We don't
every
take
year.
Federal subsidies. We take research grants at about. It would be over $20 million.
Are you including Pell Grants
including
in that?
Pell Grants? I am. You remember your time at Hartford. Wesleyan is a small school.
Yeah.
And we certainly hope it doesn't come to losing federal funding. What we have said, what we were going to do is not cooperate with what would have to be extrajuridical deportation proceedings, because there's no way you could actually deport 10 million people in one or two administrations. So there would have to be extraordinary cooperation of all kinds of folks in society to deport people who have been living here for many years. And we've said we're not going to cooperate with that voluntarily. We will use the law to protect our students.
Okay. So, but what you're saying is that you disagree with the policy, perceived policy, anticipated policy of the Trump administration, so you won't be abiding by it. And my only point is, it's a little weird to say we're not going to follow federal directives, but at the same time, we're going to take federal money. It's a little bit like the rich kid denouncing his parents, but living in the guest house. A little bit, if it's a matter of principle for you.
No, it's not.
No, of course it's, you want the moral posturing, but you want to keep the subsidy.
Do you want to ask me a question? Shall I go ahead? You know plenty of states that were against Obamacare that continue to take Medicaid funding, that continue to take money for roads. We're not declaring we're not going to abide by a policy, because there is no policy yet. What we've said is, given the rhetoric of mass deportation that was used in the campaign, we want to make clear that without warrants and subpoenas, we're not going to voluntarily cooperate with Border Patrol people. And that's within our rights, as we don't have to actually bow down before the federal government, as you and your listeners have always said, right? You don't want to have
I'm suggesting
now that you're in charge doesn't mean you can do what you want.
No, I'm suggesting abiding by federal law, and I do think you're sending sort of an odd message to your students, kind of an a la carte approach to to criminal justice or justice under the law, when you say we like this, we're going to abide by it, we don't like this, we're not going to.
It's a really important point, and that is my biggest hesitation for taking the stand we took, was exactly that. We're not taking an a la carte approach to the law. What we are saying is that if we are asked to cooperate with the releasing information about our students who've been living in this country for a decade or 15 years, we're not going to do that without legal exigencies provided by Border Patrol officials. There is no way you could deport 10 million people legally through the court system within the next 10 years.
But you keep pointing that. I'm actually not talking about 10 million. I'm talking about Wesleyan. Right. Okay, so here I want to quote you now. You're saying these are small steps, to be sure, I'm quoting you, in the face of a very frightening wave of threats to roll back the civil rights gains made in recent decades. Is there a civil right to enter the United States illegally and be educated at public expense? Is that a new civil right, would you say? And does that right apply to all, say, 8 billion people in the world?
Of course not.
Then what are you talking about?
Well, there has been throughout the campaign threats to roll back advances for voting rights for African Americans, for rights for
Which rights for African Americans?
Excuse me? To vote.
Which rights for African Americans?
Voting rights for African Americans. It's very clear that voting restrictions in several states were surgically, I think I'm quoting now, surgically developed to keep black people from voting. So what I've said,
so Donald Trump has threatened to remove. No, hold on. You made the allegation. I just want you to explain it, if you would. You're saying that Donald Trump said that he will, if elected president, reduce the voting rights for black Americans? I mean, that didn't happen.
As you quoted me, what I said is that there is a great threat to roll back civil rights gains of recent decades. And you can see that, that in the rhetoric of the campaign, and what we have said is that we will not cooperate unless forced to through warrants and subpoenas with federal efforts to
but
have
with respect,
mass
Doctor, hold on. You just made a
deportations.
specific allegation, and I think it's fair to ask you to back it up. You said that that rhetoric during the campaign, presumably from the Trump campaign, included abridging the voting rights of African Americans, specifically African Americans. And I'm just asking you to cite that. What are you talking about?
So in Texas and North Carolina, there have been real efforts to roll back the voting rights legislation of recent decades and to keep people from the polls. And whether that means restricting early voting, whether that means making it harder for people to get to the polls, having fewer polling stations. I'm also referring to the very explicit
Those aren't
efforts
race
to roll
specific.
back.
I mean, look. People respect you as a scholar and a university president, and you're throwing around a lot of intemperate rhetoric that you can't back up. I mean, there was no specific effort. I don't know what I don't know what you're talking about, and I think it's unhelpful to make that allegation. But let me just say, finally, you said here, and I'm quoting, "Now, like so many around the country, I find myself wondering whether I should have done more to prevent the election of Donald Trump." And I'm wondering what you mean. What could you, as the president of a liberal arts college or university in Connecticut, have done to prevent the election of Donald Trump?
What I could have done was to ensure that students at Wesleyan who were on the right or the left turned their attention more to national politics. I do think that what I was getting at in that op-ed was that I feel that many of our students on college campuses are being more political now after the election than they were before, that they didn't engage in the political system. And the fact is, right now, we have a new administration coming to power, and I think it's important for us to take stands of principle, not to choose a la carte what laws we're going to obey, but to articulate our principles and to do our best to participate in the public political process. And I think many of our students abdicated that responsibility.
But you say here you wish you'd done more to keep Trump from getting elected. I mean, that's something that a political consultant would say. You're a university president. Do you really see your job as that partisan to prevent a specific candidate from getting elected?
No, I don't see my job as but I am a citizen as well, and I think I could have done more as a citizen, not as a university president. I also said in the same piece
that's not what you say here. You say, like many university people.
I do say that. I do say that in the piece that I don't think it's the role of a university president to design the politics of the campus. I think a university campus has to have room for conservatives, for people of faith, for atheists, for people on all sides of the political spectrum. And I do think it's important for a president not to hide his or her political views, but to make sure that everybody's political views get a fair hearing on the campus. And that, as you know, that doesn't always happen. And I do think it's really important that
I'm quoting now, and you say this as the university president, you wish more people would, quote, condemn his campaign of hate-filled demagoguery. It doesn't sound like someone who is allowing room for alternate points of view at all.
Well, I think taking a point of view does not diminish the possibility for other people to take points of view.
Okay.
I just met
I'm
yesterday
totally losing track of your position, but I appreciate your coming out, Dr. Roth. Yeah, I am, actually, because you sound like a...
Thank you for making room for other points of view, too.
Well, I am. That's why I wanted you to come on. I'm glad that you did.
That's why I thanked you. That's why I thanked you.
Thanks, Doctor.